The world is full of monsters, from beasts that could eclipse cities to demons that haunt a human heart. Some monsters are created naturally, a result of evolution, both exoteric and esoteric, or they are natural creatures of their own worlds and simply far from home. Others are simply mutations of an existing species, a trick of genetics, of birth, or circumstances, causing them to be considered separate from their own species, community, or family. And then there are the monsters that are created artificially. Some monsters become so willingly, or even eagerly. The skeleton man who consumed his entire family after consuming his own flesh. The vampire wife who willingly sold her husband to be with a vampire. The scientist who gave himself radiation hoping to become more than he was. Then there were the monsters who were made so by their own transgressions and choices, even if they didn't realize the consequences. The great king who cooked and served his own sons to his gods in a banquet to test their divinity, only to be transformed into the first lycanthrope. The curious man who solved puzzles of pleasure and pain, only to be transformed himself into a fleshless beast of eternal pain. The whaler who sought out a leviathan, not realizing that killing the beast would make himself into a leviathan to replace what he killed. And then there are the monsters who were made into monsters, not by any transgression nor choice they made, but by the choice of another. The baby who kidnapped by a goblin king because of a wish made by his sister, only to become the newest goblin in the court. The man consumed by his own weapon, only to become something neither man nor machine. The woman who was kidnapped, raped, mutilated, and murdered, now haunting the town she was murdered in. The beast that is created by invention for a world that hates it. There are many examples of monsters and beasts that were created artificially, through magic or science experimentation, through divine or demonic intervention, through cruelty or kindness. But they all have something in common. They were made. I was 8 years old when I realized what my dad was doing wasn't right. When you're young, you don't question your parents too much. It's the only world you know, and there's no real reason to question it when you have so little exposure to the outside world. What I always knew before this point was that Mom took care of the house and me, and that Dad always worked, usually in his lab or in the basement. Whenever I went out, it was always with Dad, and Mom always stayed home. Mom looked like most other women, except for the fact her hair only grew on half of her head, and the other half of her head was covered in a rough scar, a scar roughly in the shape of a lightning bolt. When I asked Dad about it, he just said she had an accident when she was younger, and he had to make sure that she was okay. He also said not to bring it up to Mom because it made her upset. I followed that rule until I was 8 years old, when I was alone with Mom and I asked her why she had the scar. She was rolling cookie dough at the time, but the moment she heard the question, she stopped. She turned real still and she faced me, her eyes wide as oily tears fell from her eyes. I say oily because it had rainbow streaks in it, falling down onto the cookie dough. He did this, he did this, he did this, she said in a whisper as she got louder and louder, as she got closer and closer to me. He did this, he did this, he did this, she started to yell as she grabbed my shoulders and she pulled me closer to my face. He's done the same to you. He's done the same to you. He's done the same to you, she said as she began to shake. her eyes rolling into the back of her head as she let me go, and she let out a moan before falling to the floor. In terror, I ran to get Dad, who quickly took her away and brought her to the basement. After a few hours, he returned, his lab coat bloody and his gloved hands oily. As he looked me over before he said, "And that's why you don't ask Mom about her scar. Is she going to be okay? She will be fine in the morning. But be more careful. Seizures are quite serious, and it would be a lot of work to find a replacement," he said at the time. I thought he was joking about finding a replacement. I now know that is no longer true. But even at a young age, I could see how scared my mom was. The next day, though, seeing Mom back to normal made things easier to accept, especially since Mom told me she just had a silly little seizure. Things continued like that for a few more years until the day that Mom disappeared. In the weeks leading up to Mom's disappearance, she was making more and more mistakes. Sometimes spilling tea. Sometimes she would take longer to cook than what Dad said was normal. Sometimes she would say her words out of order, or she would spend a long time looking out through the window. Once or twice, I even saw her holding the doorknob of the front door, like she was going to open the door and leave. She would stare at the door, her eyes full of those oily tears. Sometimes she would be talking to me, when suddenly her eyes started tearing up and her words slowed before she stopped, just quietly staring at me, her eyes full of sadness and looking like she wanted to tell me something, only to be unable to tell me anything. And that was just what she did. Dad was also spending a lot of time with her, usually by taking her into the basement, sometimes for hours or even days at a time. New scars on her head, fingers, and neck. Her behavior would be normal, usually a few hours, maybe a few days, but then she would be back to moving slowly, shaking, or staring again. Eventually, Dad just took her into the basement and never brought her back. When I asked, he said that she was just very sick and he was going to make her better. I was old enough by that point to take care of myself, but I still missed her. After a week, I woke up. When I went downstairs, I saw a new woman in the kitchen. She told me that she was my aunt, apparently my mom's sister, even though they looked nothing alike. She had no scar on her head, and she had her entire head of hair, but her behavior and voice was like Mom's. Exactly like Mom's. The way she walked, the way she talked, the stories she told, the jokes she told, the way she tucked me into bed, the way she read me a book, the way she woke me up, the way she always went down to Dad's lab, and even the way she smiled was exactly the same. A level of imitation that I knew for a fact simply wasn't possible. My aunt was exactly like my mom, and my mom was still in the basement. I was 12 years old when I tried to tell an officer that something was wrong. I didn't have a lot of moments in public where I could get away from Dad. I didn't go to school. I was homeschooled by my mom and then my aunt. I wasn't allowed to play outside without Dad watching. And when Dad left to go to the lab, all of the doors and windows were locked and I was watched. But sometimes Dad would go shopping and bring me along. Sometimes, when the cart was full and I needed to go to the bathroom, he would trust me to go to the bathroom by myself. In the grocery store, there was an officer who always stood near the bathroom. I don't know why he was always there. I don't know if he was a guard or a police officer, but I figured if there was anyone I could tell him, while near the bathroom, far from where Dad was. I told the officer what I knew about my mom acting weird, about my aunt acting exactly the same, and how she was taken to the basement and she never returned, how I felt like my dad was doing something he shouldn't do. The officer laughed at me when I told him my story. Man, kids come up with the craziest things. Sweetie, I know divorce is hard, but your mommy and daddy are now separated. That new woman in your house is your stepmom. I know she feels different from your mom, but I wouldn't call her an aunt. And I know your dad is a good man. Dr. Moreau saved my life and has saved the lives of half of the town. There is no way in hell he can be anything like in your story. Now, if you don't run along back to your dad, I will escort you back and tell him what you said. You don't want that, do you? He said, as I gulped and shook my head. Please, don't tell my dad, I said, as I ran off back to my dad, knowing that if I waited too long, that I would be questioned. In that moment, I felt truly alone. If the officer wasn't going to listen to me, who was going to listen to me? From the conversations I heard Dav have with everyone else in town, they all loved him, and they all thought he could do no wrong. I heard how he was old-fashioned, and that was why his wife always stayed at home, why I was always homeschooled, and why I wasn't allowed to play outside with the other children. I was just a little girl in their eyes, and having me outside and away from him left me at the mercy of an invisible monster that they were convinced haunted the town. Apparently, women and young girls disappeared in town on a semi-regular basis, especially those from out of town, but even local girls had been taken. It made everyone feel like I was always safest at my dad's, and I felt like I had no escape. I couldn't open the doors nor windows, and I didn't know anyone in town well enough to go to them. Hell, I wasn't even allowed to talk to them, even with Dad there. The few times I tried, he always told me to quiet down because the adults were talking. And again, they'd usually comment on him being old-fashioned, but no one spoke up to my defense. After all, if Dr. Moreau was saving lives, there was no way he could be abusive to his own child. I didn't learn the word abuse until after I finally left. The day I left was the day when everything went bad. The basement door was a massive steel door that looked like it was made for a bank vault. It had both a digital key code and a massive old-fashioned lock that needed an equally old key to open. And even then, it only opened into an airlock that had an equally massive door on the other side. I had never actually seen down in the basement. Dad was out at the lab while I was alone with my aunt. I heard scratching from the door, like a dog was trying to get out of the basement. It went on for about an hour with no cause, not pausing, not getting louder either. Then finally, I heard a large snap from the steel door, sounding like what I thought a gunshot would sound like. It was the sound of the steel door breaking off its hinges. What crawled out of the basement was not something I could ever imagine, even in my worst nightmares. It had 2 arms and 2 legs, that it used all 4 of them to move. The arms and legs were at least 2 meters long, and the body was at least 3 meters long as it moved forward like an ant from hell. The head had long hair cascading down its body. Scars, metal plates, and wires crisscrossed its body. Exposed bone in its ribs, arms, and legs. revealed that the bone was replaced with steel, covered in a thin sheen of oil and blood. Tendons replaced with metal wires resembling the strings of a puppet. And the most horrible part was the face. The eyes were removed from the sockets, leaving behind only bloody holes that constantly dripped more of that strange, oily blood. The nose was also cleanly removed, leaving only a hole in its face, also bleeding and dripping. The mouth was missing skin, revealing too many teeth in a permanent grin, also smeared in that oily blood, as it sniffed the air through the bloody hole in its face. As it turned towards me, a single word escaped its bare teeth. "Moreau," it whispered as it crawled towards me, hands and feet carefully feeling its way toward me. It got closer and closer to me, and I only stood, paralyzed in fear, as it finally approached, and it felt my face with its fingers. Despite how scary it appeared, the monster's fingers were very soft as it felt my face, gently and lovingly as it whispered my name. "Emily?" Only as soon as it whispered my name, my aunt came running from a different room, crashing into the monster, both of them crashing through the wall and onto the front lawn. On the lawn, the monster and my aunt fought with great strength. Despite the beast's massive size, my aunt was holding her own, her fists cracking the air, and the blows causing more oily blood to leak from the monster's skin, while the neighbors were screaming. But despite everything that I saw, I didn't want to run. Not yet. Instead, I turned to the basement door. The open door beckoned me as I finally made my way down into the basement. I expected it to be dark and dim, a few flickering lights, computers, vials, and charts on the wall. What I saw instead was a brightly lit, medical-looking space with baby blue walls and with large tubes full of clear fluid containing people, or what was left of people. Inside of one tube, I could see what resembled a human nervous system, a brain, a spinal cord with long, root-like nerves acting as the arms and legs. As I walked by, the nerves moved like it was watching me, sensing me as it touched the glass of the tube, and inside of the glass, I could hear the voice echo. A voice that somehow existed without any mouth nor a way to speak. "Free me, my child," the voice said in a familiar tone. The same voice as the monster in the stairs above. The same voice as my mother. Inside another tube, a vaguely humanoid shape made out of fleshy helixes, like gigantic DNA strands, tapped the tube, echoing that same voice. "Free me," the helix said. The red-purple helixes of skinless flesh tapped the glass as well. Trapped in an identical prison to the living nervous system, but they were both angels compared to what was left in the remaining tube. The final tube contained something that was made from what looked like living light. It folded in on itself like origami, folding into itself in ways that no three-dimensional nor two-dimensional object could move. It was a wide open sunburst, then a three-dimensional cube, then it was an eye floating, then it was something with an infinite amount of feathery wings, every wing containing an infinite amount of eyes, before it then folded into a winged figure with no face that stood only half as tall as I was. It now resembled a moving two-dimensional angel made from rectangles, circles, and triangles that moved inside of the tube as it tapped the glass. "Free me, my child," the angel said as I turned to the final tube, shattered and broken open, clearly where the final creature came from. I looked around the lab, hoping for a release switch or a button, but I could see no way to open the tube, at least not until I saw a large hammer. What it was for, I don't want to think about, but I could see the blood on the hammer's face. I grabbed the hammer, and I could hear the buzz of excitement from the experiments. "Break the glass! Free us!" the tube said as I brought the hammer closer to the glass. As I got ready to swing, I heard a yell from the stairs. "Put the hammer down!" I heard in my father's voice as I turned to face him. My grip tightened on the handle as I turned to him. "Break the glass! Free us, please!" My mom's voice echoed beyond the glass. "Why? Why should I listen to you?" I asked, directing my voice towards Dad, but my question was for him and the experiments. "You can hear them? You can understand them?" Dad asked, as I didn't answer, but apparently my silence answered the question for him. "That's great! That means the connection works." I thought there was a chance it didn't work, but I'm glad it did. "My experiments always work in time," Dad said, taking a step down the stairs as I lifted the hammer higher. "Talk now, or I break the glass now." "Break it! Break it now! If you don't let us go, he'll keep us here forever." Your mom? She was an extraordinary being. Strong and powerful in ways that humans just weren't. I was supposed to observe her from a distance, understand her, find a way to replicate what she could do. I fell in love with what she could do. I wasn't supposed to catch her, but I did, only for her to escape. Time and again, I would catch her, and time and again, she would escape. At least until I finally learned how to remove those pesky parts of her that let her escape, he said, gesturing to the tubes around me. A little adjustment, a little surgery, and I could remove part of her. And she was still too strong, still too inhuman, so I removed another piece, then another piece. Then I left something inside of her so I could control her. Then we had you. But as a child, you just kept messing everything up. She kept trying to escape. She kept trying to break free, to gain control. I couldn't let her, because I knew if she got out, she would end me and everyone else in town. Eventually, the control I had in her wasn't enough. So I removed one final piece of her, and then she would finally listen to me. A control that would never end and would never fade, he said, each word dripping more and more horror into my heart. I don't know how he could do something so cruel and not realize it was cruel. He said it as casually as if he gave her a haircut. I watched his face, hoping for a flicker of something. Guilt, sadness, sorrow, or at least shame in his actions. But there was none of that in his face nor voice. If anything, he was proud of his work. He ripped an angel from the heavens, tore off her wings, halo, and mask, and he was just proud of the fact that he figured out how to do that. "My aunt is my mom?" I asked, and he shrugged. "Well, sorta. She's what's left of your mom after I removed the last bit of rebellion. Now, come over here, Emily. You can forget all about this. Just let me do a little adjustment to make you better. You'll go to sleep, and when you wake up, you'll forget all about this. You are an experiment, but you're also my daughter. Let me help you, he said as he took another step closer, and I readied my swing. They'll never accept you. You need to be controlled before you'd ever be free. If you don't let me control you, then I can never let you leave this house, he said as I swung at the glass. The glass broke easier than I expected. The liquid left the hole as the helix I stood next to slipped through the hole. It quickly made its way towards Dad. The helix was one long, fleshy tangle that twisted and folded on itself as it made its way towards Dad. Then Dad pulled something metallic from his coat as he pointed it towards me. There was a bright flash and a loud bang as I fell forward, the pain slowly registering as I realized dimly that I was shot. As I faded into the darkness, I remember thinking, I always thought being shot would hurt more than this. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. My stomach was bandaged as the nurse gradually explained what happened. Apparently, the fight between the monster and my aunt were seen by the neighbors, so they reported it to the police. My aunt was fatally wounded as the police arrived, as they kept shooting the monster until she was killed. Then they made their way down to the basement, where they found me tangled up by the flesh helix. The helix was pulled away from me, which was holding my wound closed, as it was buried under gunfire, and the other monsters in the tubes were destroyed as well. They couldn't find my dad. They did finally believe me when I told them that it was my dad who created the monsters, and it was my dad who shot me, but they didn't seem to care too much about finding him. We got his monsters. He left his research behind. He isn't dangerous by himself, the doctor said while making marks on my charts. Even with security in my room, I felt alone as realization washed over me like a cold wave. My dad shot me because he wanted to get away. He knew that if he injured the helix, it would keep trying to kill him. But he also knew that the helix, or any other monster in his basement lab, would have sacrificed itself to protect me. Any monster except him.